Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022, and I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. If you are new to this format, every other broadcast that we do, we have a live question and answer. That's one where you can bring up any question about therapy, relationship, psychology. You can bring up a topic that you would like me to speak about or expand on. If you have family and friends that want to join, if you're an Evoke current Evoke family or an Evoke alumni, and you want family and friends to join, you're welcome to share with them the URL for this. You're welcome to bring a question from them. If you are a family or a friend of an Evoke client, you could submit questions during the broadcast this evening. So we're going to take questions as they come in. We have a handful of pre-submitted questions, so I'm going to begin with those, and then we'll get on to any live questions that have come in this evening. Our first person writes, our 16-year-old son has been in and out of treatment for the past 2 years. He is currently saying, why bother? Because he knows he'll be away for at least another year. He's right about not coming home anytime soon. He struggles with depression, defiance, and substance addiction. He had to be restrained yesterday for an outburst. He's in a repetitive loop of sabotaging himself in treatment and in life in general. How can we best respond when he falls apart like this? These kinds of chronic issues where somebody's struggling or relapsing or not making progress can be very challenging. So the first thing that everybody deserves in these kinds of situations, meaning the parents, is compassion and understanding for how frustrating, how hopeless it can feel at times. I think part of the idea here is to understand why his behavior is the way it is. Why is he, and I don't love this phrase, but it's the one that people use. Why is he sabotaging things for himself? Why is he self-sabotaging? Because like I often or always teach, in some story, in some framework, everything that everybody does makes sense. Part of it, I think this is really important to note, part of it could be consciously or unconsciously aimed at you giving up hope also, kind of relaxing. That's a long time in treatment. When I think about this, when I think about somebody being in treatment for that long, I think that they're going to go through ebbs and flows. And when I hear young people talk about the length of stay in our program and other programs and saying, why should I bother? My response is the work is its own reward. Whether or not you're here or the next place or even long after treatment, the work is its own reward. It has its own value. And so oftentimes when I talk to clients who are threatening to give up or who are demonstrating a pattern of behavior that shows that they're giving up, part of what I say is, it's not that different from real life. If you're like me, and some of you are and some of you aren't, I spent the first 25 years of my life, 30 years of my life, waiting for life to begin, assuming that life began after I moved out of the house, after I got into college, after I got married, after I had children, after I had a full-time job. And what I realized, of course, the obvious thing that was sitting right in front of me was life was happening all along. That idea, that limited kind of vision that you're describing, that's in part a function. I mean, it could be a function of some of his issues, but even in a typically well-adjusted child, that ability to not see the long term, to not have the perspective that you and I have because we're old people, is indicative of having that adolescent brain. And so sometimes you just don't listen to it. I mean, you listen to it, you hear it, but you don't react to it. I mean, more than anything, remaining curious about what it means, not reacting to it, turning it back. I mean, in essence, don't do something with it. Don't react to it. I think that even if it's not conscious, that part of what we would call secondary gain, the primary gain is anxiety reduction, but the secondary gain is what do we get out of it interpersonally. Part of it is a dynamic between you and your child, and learning to not react or learning to stay curious and take a will see attitude kind of hands it back to them. Or I think more accurately, if we're using that analogy of handing things over, it's letting it drop at their feet and seeing what they do with it. When I talk to my youngest child, I say something to her nowadays when she struggles with things. I say to her, it's your life. Your symptoms, your issues, your decisions are going to impact you. Of course, there are going to be boundaries. There are going to be consequences in our home while you're living with us. But emotionally speaking, I'm not going to get tied up into it because it's your life. I was thinking about this recently when I was reading something. I think we think of our children as a part of us or an extension of us or something that, yeah, that's the best way to say it, as an extended part of us. And while that might poetically explain the affection and connection that we feel towards them, it's not true. One of my favorite poems of all time by Gibran in The Prophet is the one on children, when he starts it off saying, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. And though they come through you, they are not from you." It's this idea that we learn to detach. We learn to see them as separate beings. Part of doing your work, part of building a foundation for a healthy attachment is your own individuation. We talk about adolescence, and when we talk about adolescence in psychology, oftentimes we're talking about somewhere around 13 to 25 because we're talking about the adolescent brain. When we're talking about that stage of development, that age group, we often talk about their differentiation and their developing their identity. But I think it's as relevant to discuss our differentiation. As I've progressed in my life from raising my older two children who are 29 and 27 down to my 20-year-old and out to my 14-year-old, I've become more independent. My life and my meaning is not so wrapped up and tied up in my children. And I will admit that I have an advantage being identifying as a man, as a male in our culture, because we're not graded on how our children do as much as women are. Men are more in our culture still graded by their professional academic prowess, their career. That's how they're measured by society. And women, mothers specifically, are more likely to be judged by how their children are doing, like it or not. That's just the way that it still tends to be in our culture. So there's an advantage to being male, to being a man, to identifying as male, because we're not societally held to that same kind of pressure and expectation. So, as repetitive as I can sound at times, do your own work on your own differentiation, work on your own hobbies, work on your own meaning in life, be informed, pay attention to your feelings, go to therapy, do the things that you have to do for yourself. But at the end of the day, turn your child's life over to them. And you do that by making your life your responsibility. And in the Audacity to Be You, I talk about this in an entire chapter, about this idea that if we have learned to see and love our children as they are, it is because we've worked on our own differentiation. We've taken responsibility for our own lives, for our own differentiation. And that's the heroic journey. So, practically speaking, I would say be curious, ask questions, slow down, make sure that your nervous system is regulated, that you're not responding from fear or from guilt. Make sure you're getting support. Dive into your work. But in terms of responding to him, you're watching him live his life and kind of sort this out, and you don't have to be responsible to pull the chains, to pull the ropes one way or the other. And it's hard. Get support for it. So thank you. Somebody writes, while my son has been in a therapeutic boarding school, my husband and I have identified a family big ticket item to increase the frequency and quality of positive interactions and conversations with our son. He only talks 20 minutes with each parent once a week. He has questions he is supposed to ask ask us to get to know us, but he doesn't bring them. I try to ask open questions and listen, but he has one word answers and it's really not going anywhere. Comments like "I don't know," "nothing," etc. come to mind. I think time and trust is probably the only way that he might share his life with us again. When he was young and he got a bath, he was very relaxed and shared his day easily. I think he needs to be feeling safe. Absolutely. You know, adolescents aren't supposed to be interested in you, kind of, sort of, so to speak. They're not interested in conversing to naturally sharing their life with you and asking you about yours. It's kind of unnatural and developmentally ill matched to have him be asking questions about your life. I remember when my mother said to me, and this was much later in life after I had all of my children, she said to me, you know, you will love your children. Parents love children more than children will love parents. And I thought about it for just a moment. I thought that's true in my case. But what she gave me was the gift of being liberated from the expectation that I had to take care of them and be there for them and give them something. Part of what just like the last question, in fact, I've seen one or two other questions that have come in before the broadcast. So I think it's going to be a theme tonight. But part of what he might be doing is differentiating. I wouldn't put him through those exercises. I remember I had a client tell me once at another program that he wasn't allowed to make it to the next level, the next kind of designated point of freedom and privilege at his wilderness program until he was able to tell his parents that he loved them. It wasn't our program, it was somebody else's wilderness program. And I remember hearing him share this story with me, and I was so sad about it. I was so sad that the therapist took that idea up, maybe from the parents, conscious or unconscious, and made the child, obligated the child to take care of the parents in that way. You know, part of our gift to our children, the most important thing that we can do, well, it's at least tied for other things in first place, is not have them take care of us and our needs. And part of what I hear in your question, the things that he's being asked to do with these 20-minute calls, it's really your need or the therapist's need or the therapist's need to make you happy. I mean, that's what my ear hears. If my son or daughter didn't want to ask me questions about me, that would be okay. They're not my friends in the sense that I get my my sense of belonging and connection like I do with my peers, like I do with my wife or friends. That's not their role. So part of it again, I think there might not be enough attention to the differentiation, to the separation piece. There seems like there might be a little bit of upside down thinking that he's supposed to be interested in you. Adolescence is developmentally a narcissistic phase. Again, as always, I'm not saying you can't have boundaries for mistreatment or that are in line with your values. You can always have those anytime. But speaking therapeutically, I don't really think it's his job to be interested in you. And I would say to the therapist, hey, can we switch it up? This doesn't seem to be working for him. And if we're going to use the program and the behavioral aspects of the program to kind of shape him up into this kind of a kid, I'm not sure that's who he really is. I teach and talk constantly about the idea that the outcome of therapy is becoming who you are. And I'm not sure that that's happening in this case. So I apologize if I've overstepped or misunderstood or don't know the context, but those are some of my thoughts. I would switch it up. I would tell the therapist you want something different and that you don't need him to be interested or to give you all the information about his day, to kind of report to you. I remember when I was in family therapy a few years ago with my child who's now 20, who at the time was probably 17, and we came into family therapy, and immediately the therapist asked my son to update us on his week about how he was doing with various issues that he was challenged with. And I stopped a couple of moments into it and I said, you know, I don't need this. I don't need my son to be accountable for the inner workings of himself. I'm afraid that he's just going to be paying attention to what he thinks we want and need, and not what he needs. Now, if we're all going to go around and be accountable at that level, I guess fair is fair. But he probably doesn't want to hear about my struggles either. And my son, I think, in defense of the therapist, started to defend the idea and to tell me. And I said, why? Why do you need to tell me how your week went or how you're doing or that you're on the verge of changing or improving this part of your character, your behavior, your mental health or whatever? And he tried to mount an answer, and then he stopped and he said, it is just to please you, just to impress you, just to get you off my back, just to relieve you from what I think might be your anxiety or your worry about me. And I said, I don't want to do that. And we never did it again. We never went through this accountability portion of the session again in family therapy because it was inappropriate. So I'm not sure that those weekly phone calls are serving his needs. That's my summation. I think they might be designed to serve the parent's need or what the therapist thinks the parents need or what's going to make the parents happy. And I'd rather see the therapist take that on themselves, shoulder that burden, and give the parents what they need instead of having the child be the sacrificial lamb, if you will, to give the parents what they need. That sounds a little bit strong. I realize that I might be sounding really strong, but that's definitely these ideas are definitely my leanings. The next question is somebody writes, what's your recommendation for parents work while their child is in wilderness, especially if much of the issue is family dysfunction? I'll click over to the slide that I run through really quick at the end. Some of you, I understand, turn off the podcast or log out of the visual broadcast when I start going over upcoming events and announcements. But we ask all current parents to try 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or Adult Children. ACA. You can go to alanon.org, coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. All of these are 12-step based groups, so there's no professional running them. They're mutual support. And you're sharing. There's no crosstalk, so you're not getting advice from anybody during the meeting. But you're starting to go to connect to a community who has one shared life experience, and that is learning how to be in a relationship with people that are struggling with mental health and addiction. What do loving parents, loving brothers and sisters, loving children, aunts and uncles, cousins, so forth, what do loved ones who have somebody that struggles with mental health or addiction, what do they do? How do they think? How do they live? What do you do if your child's suicidal? What do you do if your child's passed on? What do you do with that when you have a parent who's an alcoholic who won't stop, won't respond to invitations for treatment? What do you do when somebody in the context of their mental illness or their addiction is abusing you, lying to you, mistreating you? What do you do? And so you start to learn how to think. See, at Evoke, there are definitely tools and skills that we teach and talk about, but really it is about a fundamental transformation of consciousness, thinking differently about yourself, about your place in the world, about your relationship to your child, and your relationship to their problems. I love ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, or adultchildren.org. The title, like a lot of these mental health services and self-help books, is a little bit misleading. You don't have to have a parent that is obviously identified as an alcoholic or an addict to get something out of it. In fact, I've had lots of people that are familiar with 12 steps and end up trying just on a whim or wanting to try something different, trying an ACA meeting, adult children meeting, and telling me that it was the most powerful and profound of all the 12 steps. We ask you to try 6 variations. Like I talk about, listening to the podcast, reading self-help books, coming to our intensives. If you don't know what to do in therapy and intensive, can be a great way to springboard into your work if you know what your work is. I'm a huge fan, obviously, of therapy. I go to therapy, have for more than 2 decades. My wife, the same thing. All of our children are in therapy more than they're not, because we think of it in our family as just something you do to maintain your mental health. I love what Joseph Campbell says about sacred spaces and therapy, that it's the place that you go back to again and again to find yourself. So um, I think you find something that touches you, that reaches you, that you connect to. You find something that's going to help you shift your way of thinking. You know, when Albert Einstein was accused of creating the atomic bomb, he came up with some of the science that led, of course, to the atom bomb. He hated that association, of course, as anybody would, who's responsible for the creation of a weapon of such mass destruction. And at that time, Einstein was quoted as saying, "You cannot solve a problem at the same level of consciousness in which it was created. You have to think differently or beyond or at a new level." And I think that's what all of these services, the reading, the podcasts, the groups. There are also other groups. You know, I've talked to a new group called Other Parents Like Me. You can Google that. There are other groups that where peers meet together and they have daily meetings. There are a lot of things like that. So those are just some things. All right, I have a question that looks like it's in two parts. Somebody writes, our 16-year-old son spent 10 weeks at Evoke, where he was diagnosed on the autism spectrum disorder. He then moved to a therapeutic boarding school. Our plan was to move him back home at the end of the school year, this school year. He came back home over Christmas for his first home visit and refused to go back to the school. Using transport was not an option. Currently, he is not in school at all. I work from home, and we are all together all the time, and I'm barely managing on a daily basis. I feel like we all did so much work in the past year, but because none of us were prepared for him to return now, old habits are coming back. I am so very angry, tired, and I've given so much that there is nothing left. I'm just depleted. I am also going through cancer treatment. My son is extremely intelligent, but concrete and inflexible. He struggles with executive functioning and anxiety. And then to continue, I don't know if he is not doing the work because he is not able or not willing. We have given him every resource we can think of for him to be successful, and he has been so resistant, though he did just start therapy. Despite all of us having our own therapists and doing the podcast, books, everything, I am at the end of my rope. I feel like I have so little left of me that I have nothing left to give anybody else. I know you say to continue to do the work, but my husband and I are, and to set clear boundaries. But what can we do when we feel like we have nothing? We've done everything that we can within reason and our financial ability, but it's impossible to live with my son, who is a minor who we are responsible for. I mean, that's a really, really, really difficult question. Because I think you've kind of, in your question, you kind of have exhausted every idea that I have, which is get support. You know, maybe again, you're going to support groups not to learn how to change your son, but to learn how to live with him. I assume, I'm not even going to say that you give him off to foster care. That I'm assuming that's not the case. I don't know that I've ever suggested that or had a parent do it when a child was difficult like this. So I'm not saying that. So short of that, I suppose if you've tried everything, which it sounds like you have, you said you have, I suppose you have to learn how to live with it. And so instead of going to all of these groups thinking of those things as a means to an end, you go to those groups, the therapists, as an end only, meaning that you're going there to get some peace of mind, to get some support, to get some empathy. I think it's really critical, fundamentally critical, that when we do our work and when we engage professionals or sponsors or mentors, mentors, that we're extremely clear about what we need. And when I read the question, your two-part question, hearing about your cancer treatment, hearing how exhausted you are, hearing how much you've done, you need support. I don't have any other solutions other than the ones that you've described that you've already tried. The only thing that I might read into your question or might see in your question is you're thinking of those things as a way to learn tools, techniques, to get a silver bullet, to get that magic pixie dust to solve an external problem. One way to think about it, forgive the sloppiness of the metaphor, but imagine that you had a loved one that passed away. You wouldn't go to therapy to bring them back to life. You would go to therapy to help for help learning how to carry your grief. And I think when you have a child that you can't, because of finances, because of limitations, I'm not sure why not utilizing transport again. I'm assuming, well, I don't know what it is. I don't know why that's off the table. But if that's off the table, because that's the first place I would have gone, is using transports if it's this dire. But you're really going to these places, to these professionals, and to these group to learn how to deal with something that's outside of your control. And maybe in that work, with that shift, there can be a shift in the relationship. So I'm really, really sorry. And I hear that it feels like seems like an unsolvable problem. So make sure that you can sit with other people who can offer you love and support and compassion as you sit in your unsolvable problem. And that's what I hear you describing. Somebody writes, can a person learn when they are dissociating? How do we call them back? Can we? You can call them back. I mean, yes, you can call them back, but it's not that simple. You can take them to the present, to the five senses, what they're seeing, feeling, smelling, tasting, hearing. Take them back to the present moment in that way. But really, it takes some more than cooperation on their part, some initiation on their part to interrupt disassociation on a regular basis. In other words, the disassociation is serving a really significant purpose of some kind of distress, managing some kind of distress or pain. And so they've got to be motivated themselves to find grounding techniques like the ones I was just referring to with the senses. Get them into their intellectual brain. You know what a lot of people would call intellectualizing? Talking in your head. That's what I would encourage them and you to try to do. To talk about something intellectual or to talk about the senses. But I'm more interested with the dissociation, like what's it serving? What's the pain? What's the distress? Again, I talked about this last night. If we pay too much attention to symptoms and symptom reduction, the symptom is doing its job to distract not only the individual who's suffering through the symptom, not only is it serving them to distract from the pain, but it's distracting everybody else from having a conversation about what's really happening, which is some kind of emotional distress, some kind of feeling. And so rather than kind of tearing the crutches away from somebody, we try to get curious. My therapist talks about this idea of being a crutch stealer. I think it was something that was said to her when she was training. Being a crutch stealer and just saying, or one of her supervisors ranted during one of the supervision sessions about how she liked to collect crutches as a therapist. So we try not to tear people's crutches away and pull them away, but rather get curious about why they have them. Where's the wound? Where's the injury? Somebody writes, related to anger and dysregulation and the like from adolescents, what background, parenting, raising, what have you, do you see from those who are enrolled in your program? I'm going to read that again so I can understand the question. Related to anger and dysregulation and the like from adolescents? What background, parenting, raising, what have you, do you see from those who are enrolled in your program? I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I'm sorry that I'm not getting it. You might reword it. I'll try to answer what I think the question is. You know, anger, rage, aggression is kind of a last resort for somebody that doesn't have any other way to cope with things that are outside of their control. Martin Luther King has a famous quote that says that a riot is the language of the unheard. And so when somebody's full of rage, it's because they're feeling controlled. They're feeling powerless, ironically. And they're trying to get a sense of power back. They're feeling helpless, scared, hurt. So we try to understand again what's the anger and the rage covering up. Sometimes for children is because they're parented in such a way that they don't have the ability to maintain their own sovereignty. Sometimes the characteristic is that parents are intrusive. At the very beginning of this broadcast, I was describing differentiation as a task that parents go through while their children are adolescents. And for parents that are unable to or unwilling to differentiate and that are intrusive, they believe that the child has to believe what they believe, live the way that they live, adhere to the philosophy that they adhere to. In the literature, they call these families strict father families. Again, gender bias, but that's what the literature calls them. In these strict father families, there's this idea about getting it right versus getting it real. In the introduction to my book, the Audacity to Be You, Jamie Gill talks about that dynamic in families. So I think it's from kids that feel powerless and scared and weak, ironically. And like all symptoms, one of the goals, the functions of the symptom is to mask that vulnerability. And I would just be curious again about how that with the parents, are they over imposing on the child? Are they being intrusive? Do they want the child to think, feel, be like them, or do they understand what it means, and can they engage in the process of helping the child find out who they are and being able to tell the parents how they feel? You know, psychotherapy for adolescents and young adults is principally, one of the primary tasks in all of treatment is to get the child to tell the parent how they feel specifically about the parent. And that's not going to go over well for most families. Even I, who have been trained in this and overtrained in this, have struggled at times when my kids have told me how they felt about me. It didn't resonate with me. I didn't see it the same way that they did. I had all kinds of defenses. One of my favorite broadcasts, I think it's number 320, Malia. You can look it up. It's called Challenging the Notion of What It Means to Be a Good Parent. And it's this idea about listening and understanding as the goal rather than getting it right or getting it perfect, because we can't get it right and perfect all the time. And that what we can do is allow our children to feel what they're feeling and hopefully, ideally, give them a place to express it, meaning we'll listen to it. So that's my guess, is that the rage, the anger is about powerlessness or fear or vulnerability, lack of tools. Somebody writes, we are just coming out of yet another lockdown. When I recognized I am at 7, 8, or 9, this is referring to last night's anger scale on 0 to 10 scale. When I recognize that I am at a 7, 8, or 9, I feel like a caged animal because I'm restricted in what I can do. Any thoughts on how to deal with our feelings in a pandemic environment? I don't know where you live. Based on where you live, it can be harder and harder, but indulge yourself. I found it difficult lately to express what I'm about to express in response to this question. Let's see if I can do it verbally. Oftentimes, we find ourselves in situations Think of it like a room that you're locked in. In this case, it's more than just a metaphor, but you're locked in. And the only two doors, the only two choices you have to escape the room are anger or guilt. A lot of clients will come to me and saying, "What do I do?" And when we explore options that are about self-care, they say, "Well, I'll feel bad, I'll feel guilty, the other person will be mad at me." You have to walk through one of the doors. And frankly, anger anger is a signal to that something usually or often I will say anger is often a symptom that you're not taking care of yourself actually. And that's why I've taught so often that self-care, if you're making progress in the area of self-care, you are doing battle with guilt. I've heard all kinds of descriptions, definitions of self-care. But the one thing that I know to be true from everybody that I've worked with is something that looks like good self-care will often bring with it a lot of guilt. And so it's not going to feel good. My therapist, I meet with her on Friday. She'll often conclude the session with this kind of ritualistic little speech that she gives me where she says, "I hope you can sit at home and watch the paint dry, stare at the wall and drool." And I've learned what that means for me. That means I like to watch sports. I like to binge watch shows. In non-pandemic times, I like to go outside and do things, bike ride, fly fish, other things. I love to see Broadway shows. I love to visit some of our big cities and go out to dinner and do some things when the pandemic's not in place. So something that feels indulgent, not self-improvement, by the way. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about self-care is that it always has to be self-improvement. Sometimes it's self-improvement, but you might be one of those people with this internalized capitalism, right? That you always have to be productive doing something or else you're not worth anything. If you have that urge to always be productive, to be doing something, to be working, try doing nothing. It's about energy in and energy out. And you need to be indulgent. You need to be selfish. You need to let people down. You need to fail. You need to come up short as a parent or a partner. Those are the kinds of those are the barriers that get in the way of self-care is all of those things. So that's my thought. Walking away, taking a time out, stopping a conversation. I mean, you can do that in the same room. Taking a walk, losing yourself in a television show. It doesn't have to be reflective or introspective or self-help work. It's just giving your nervous system a chance to down-regulate. So anything indulgent can do that or may do that. Oh, I said it was number 320. It's number 309. What it means, challenging our culture's idea of what it means to be a good parent. Malia's posted it for those of you that are watching live. Somebody writes, "We have been taught to suggest a timeout for our son before he gets out of control for the number of minutes equivalent to his age via a parenting program. We're also to take our time out as parents the number of minutes equivalent to our age as needed. Our son has showed oppositional defiant behavior since he was very young. When we would suggest a timeout, he would get very angry like we were telling him what to do. He also did not want to stop his negotiation skills. When I would take a timeout, he would follow me around and become volatile. He is currently working on his anger and knowing when to take a timeout at a therapeutic school. It sounds like it's still an issue. He would go from 0 to 60, so it sounds like a trauma response. He was adopted at birth, and I realize that is a trauma. Any suggestions on what to say when our son needs to take a break so as to not trigger him? When I, his mother, take a break, I think he is triggered with abandonment, and that doesn't work well either." Yeah, that's a good question. It's always interesting when people ask me questions and then tell me all the things that they've tried, which are the things that I was going to suggest. I mean, you're doing something pretty big to address it right now, which is you're having him outside of the home with some treatment professionals. So you're not triggering him right now. You're giving him a chance to work on it. Ultimately, it will be about you taking space and you down regulating. Like I talked about during the trauma response webinar broadcast last evening. I'm going to pull out this phrase, which is one of my favorite phrases. And if you've been listening for any length of time, you will definitely recognize it. And the phrase is, you can't win. You can only choose how to lose. And I think when I get asked questions by people in therapy or on a broadcast like this, and they kind of block all the exit doors out of the prison that they're in for me to suggest, I often say to them, you just have to lose. I learned this in dealing with borderline patients, which are their behavior is marked by all or nothing thinking, and specifically making sure that there's a bad guy and a good guy in a scenario, and you're the bad guy. The game with borderlines or borderline functioning people, which are a lot of our clients, because borderline is not just a diagnosis, it's also a level of functioning. It's a way to describe just functioning no matter what the diagnosis. The name of the game is you lose, end of game. Remember that, you guys. Part of, in fact, that this can address a larger set of questions this evening. You cannot win. You can just choose how to lose. And when people feel that idea, they're inevitably liberated. I think we think so much as people and parents specifically in terms of cause and effect. What can I do? What's the button or the lever to push or to flip to get the other person to do what I need them to do? See, that's the disease that we all have. We think that the problem for our serenity is outside of us. We think the solution to our distress is in other people. Granted, children and people that live with us and loved ones who are doing crazy things are going to trigger us and dysregulate us. That's a fact. But ultimately, like they teach you in Al-Anon, you're responsible for your own serenity, your own peace of mind. And our children, wow, they make that really, really difficult. They push that idea to its limits. So my response is, I don't know exactly, but it's within you. And it won't be about him changing or finding a magic button or switch to flip. It'll be about taking responsibility for your serenity and maybe even taking some drastic measures. See, it doesn't work. It doesn't work to say, if I set this difficult boundary, he's going to be triggered by abandonment, and if I don't, then I'm going to be abused, and so I'm stuck. That setup is a failed setup to begin with. You have to choose to fail in the way that you want to fail. You have to choose how to lose. In this work, in the Evoke way, which is attachment-based therapy, in this work, you don't get to win. You don't get to be right. You can't get out of this alive. You just get to be you, which is so much better than winning. It's just we weren't taught how to do that. So my answer is choose how to lose and live with those consequences. And on the other side of that, I think you'll find something bigger, some kind of expansion of yourself, of your awareness, some kind of expansion of your conceptualization of the situation. Choose how to lose. Don't try to win. Don't try to, if codependency could be simply defined by that I think that the things outside of me will determine my peace of mind, my serenity. And so my job is to control things outside of me. I mean, that's really the essence of the 12-step recovery program for addiction, right? That's why the serenity prayer exists. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Because what's happened for the person who's abusing substances, because they can't change circumstances outside of them, they take a chemical. They just take something that reliably changes the internal state when they don't have to do work around it. You know, we have our clients read Man's Search for Meaning. Some of you may know it. It's a book by Viktor Frankl about his experiences in the concentration camps. And Viktor Frankl did not write this book for children in wilderness therapy. He wrote it for everybody on planet Earth. And I always have said that the reason that we like that book is because it doesn't matter how bad it's getting. Viktor Frankl had it worse. And I won't go into the details about what he experienced. You can read about yourself at the concentration camp, the violence, the depravity, the love, the loss of loved ones. I won't talk about that. But suffice to say, he had it worse. And like it says on the cover of my book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, I'm looking at it right here. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. If we can make that shift, and it's a practice every day for me, if we can make that shift from thinking that the solution to our pain is to change our child, to realizing that the solution to our pain is to change us, we're free. That's the essence of this work. And here's the great paradox of all of it, is when you shift to trying to change others, to changing yourself, other people tend to change more because they're not in a power struggle or a fight to maintain their own sovereignty, their own sense of self. I shared this recently. Connie Zweig, the editor for one of the books that changed my life, she wrote, after visiting gurus and psychotherapy and analysis and meditation, everything that she could try, every guru that she could try, she finally came to the conclusion, and she said, I came to the realization that I was responsible for my own happiness. That the way that I was living my life was the cause of my pain. I mean, think about that. Think about that if every person and parent listening to my voice accepted the idea that the reason for their pain was the way that they were living their life. Think about what the world would change into. It would be full of love and courage and authenticity and strength and compassion, with clear boundaries, with assertive behavior, with authentic, courageous, clear behavior. So that's the end. And you know, this is not psychotherapy. What you and I are doing right now is not psychotherapy. This is question and answer. This is psychoeducation. But psychotherapy is to get you to that point. But it takes a long time to really embrace and know that the cause of our distress, our unhappiness, our lack of meaning, our lack of purpose, our lack of hope, our lack of serenity is our responsibility. It's the way that we're living our life. I read a quote last night during the broadcast. I love it. It says, one thing that all the mystics unanimously, it says, unanimously agree upon, I'll read it here. All mystics are unanimous on one thing. That the thing that they're unanimous on is that all is well. All is well. Though everything is a mess, all is well. Strange paradox, to be sure, but tragically, most people never get to see that all is well because they are asleep. That's the shift. I'm not saying that there's not pain, that there aren't tests, that people can't hurt you. I'm talking about a deeper layer of meaning and peace and serenity. I mean, my feelings fluctuate throughout the day, from anger to sadness to happiness to joy to frustration. Right? Everybody experiences that. But anytime I pause, I think about this several times throughout the week. When I take a moment and pause, when I get present with myself, I realize that under all of that fluctuating emotion, there's a wonderful, joyful sense that my happiness is up to me, not my wife, not my children, not my parents, not my friends. It's up to me. I believe that. Somebody writes, my son was at Entrada last summer and is now in a residential treatment facility. I've always believed that I should set high expectations and then praise progress and effort. As my son has struggled on his journey to manage his impulses and pursue sobriety, I've found that I've repeatedly lowered my expectations. Staying alive and out of prison seems like a pretty set of low expectations. I know that he struggles with self-esteem, and it seems that expressing my confidence in him and his ability to stay on the path would be helpful. How do I encourage him along his path without slipping into transferring my own fears into him? Fantastic question. I saw this one come in earlier today, so I was expecting it. You let go of all of your expectations. It's nothing to do with you. How his life turns out is not yours. I mean, that's the answer. It's what you think about him is none of his business. How his life turns out is up to him. So it's not about high or low expectations. It's that's not your business. I've shared this story. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't. Where Bob Dylan was asked when his son had a #1 album. Jacob is his son. And a reporter asked Bob, how do you feel about Jacob's success? And Bob said, it's irrelevant. And I know this is going to sound, I know, because I've been told plenty of times that what I'm about to say is going to sound crazy, especially to new people to this work. But I aspire to have virtually no opinion about my children and how their life turns out. It's better for me and for them. I would say that he has successfully accomplished a primary goal of his behavior and his self-medicating, which is to get your expectations off of him. What if he came to you and had expectations about how you should be or what you should be doing or who you should vote with politically or what you should think about certain philosophies or religion? It's really not, that's not how it works. Release him to his life. Love him. Give him the support that you're willing to give him to get where he needs to go, but release him from your expectations. It is incredibly taxing on a child to carry parental expectations. And one of the best ways, I mean, that's why I dropped out of high school. I mean, listen to that. I obviously have a PhD and I'm qualified for this position, but I dropped out of high school during my sophomore year. I didn't know it then, or at least I couldn't admit it. I think I had a sense of it then, but I couldn't admit it to myself because it would have ruined the whole game. Part of why I did it was I couldn't live up to people's expectations. They were telling me all of my potential, all of my giftedness, what I could do, and I could never live up to that. And because my nervous system is sensitive to those kinds of feelings and thoughts of other people, I could not take them on. So the only way I could find freedom was to burn the whole thing to the ground. And much like your son, get my parents to drop the expectation from graduating as valedictorian to just staying out of jail and staying alive. And I figured I could do that. Probably. The jail one. So I think you're on the right track. Just go a little farther. Release him from your expectations completely because it's none of your business. And I know that sounds really harsh. But there's a deeper. Bob Dylan did not love his son Jacob. Jacob went on to be successful, and I don't know Jacob, but he seems from the outside to have a rich life. And I'm sure Jacob knew exactly how his father loved him, and it had nothing to do with what he did or didn't do. The exaggerated example of this idea of expectations is Midas. You know, the Midas touch, the myth about everything that Midas touches turns to gold. In other words, everything is measured by its objective value to Midas. That's what that story is about. It's about objectifying other people. Part of what it's about. So set him free, release him from the idea of being the object, the measure of your happiness, to satisfy your expectations one way or the other. Work on yourself, work on your own expectations for yourself and the burdens that you carry, but release him from yours. He's already doing a good job of getting you to drop it, but you're almost there. And if you go into the Al-Anon meetings, to the Families Anonymous meetings, to the Codependent Anonymous meetings, you will hear everybody talking about what I'm talking about. This is the curriculum for codependency recovery. And by the way, I just want to be really clear in case anybody misunderstands me. What I'm also describing is the best way to encourage and contribute to your child's success. Another paradox, another irony. One last question before I wrap for tonight. In a family discussion, we were talking about how we all have changed and healed as a result of going through this journey of my teen son's treatment and recovery. I joked to my young daughter that she gets to reap the benefits of us doing our work and did not have to bear the brunt of the dysfunction for as long as her brother did. Her reaction was, "You act like I didn't go through it as well." Good for her. I know she is right, but I'm wondering, how long does it take for them to let go of the parents we were in the past and trust in the work that we have done? Longer than you would like. The best way to help them get to the point of letting go is to not need them to let go. I think the greatest evidence of your work will be, again, for those of you who haven't listened to it, it's one of my favorite podcasts. In my opinion, one of the most important podcasts I've done. Episode 309, challenging our culture's idea of what it means to be a good parent. You let them think that you're a loser. That's the gift that we give our children. My daughter said it recently. I posted this on my social media, that one of the greatest gifts that we can give our children is a willingness to be cast as a villain in their story. That's the gift, that we have enough self-worth, self-esteem, enough selfhood that we detach ourselves from what they think about us. And therefore, they can hate us, think we're still a loser, think we were a loser before, we're a loser later. So again, the way we help them move through it is we have no attachment to what they think about us, because it's just as I said a few minutes ago, it's none of your child's business what you think about them. It's none of your business what your child thinks of you, in a certain way of thinking. So, and the fact of the matter is, she's right. You still have more work to do. I've been at this for a long, long time, and I'm better than I was 5 years ago, but I hope to be much better 10 years from now. And I hope to be growing until I don't wake up anymore. So at any given point, my children would have plenty to complain about. So let her feel it. Validate it. It's right. She's right. There's a gaslighting or a dismissive message in, you should be grateful for how far we've come, that she's reacting to. She wants to feel what she's feeling, her anger, her hurt. And that message that you should feel grateful for the work that we've done dismisses that. And then she gets fixated on it because she's been told that she shouldn't feel that way. That's the essence of it. Thanks for the question. Great one. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I'm just going to go over upcoming announcements and events. Both of my books, The Journey of the Rogue Parent, which I've referred to several times tonight, and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I read the second one myself, per your requests. We have support groups for current and alumni wilderness families. February 3rd, that's tomorrow at 6:30 p.m., is for current and former wilderness families. We have an alumni only meeting once a month The next one is February 22nd. And we also have an intensives meeting once a month. February 8th is the next one for that. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to do a deep dive, a springboard into your own work, Finding You is the place to do it. I cannot think of something that would contribute to your child's your child maintaining their progress more than you doing this kind of work. Finding You is our personal intensive. February 23rd through 27th is our next in-person offering. We also have an online offering, March 25 through 27. And then we have, if you've been through Finding You, we have Returning to You. So anybody who's been through one or more Finding Yous can come back May 11th through 15th. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. We have attachment-based coaches for parents, individuals, couples, adults, even teens. If you want to find out about one of our coaches, contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. We have Pursuits program that lasts anywhere from 3 to 30 days, customized trips for families or young adults anywhere in the world. Set up, think therapy light with fun. Therapeutic staff doing adventure activities with the family, customized all around the world. I've already mentioned this evening that we ask all parents to try any combination of 6 12-step support groups. Also, refugerecovery.org and NAMI.org have local resources in your area to go to. So go to those websites for more information. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com and you can find us there. You can find Evoke and me, Brad, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy or at Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And also our blog has new content each week, wonderfully curated by Malia, who's our moderator this evening. My next broadcast will be February 7th on The Dance of Anger, one of my favorite books in this work about boundaries. So I'll be talking about that on February 7th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in for that. Thank you for joining me. For on behalf of the people that love you and care about you, thank you for taking an interest in your own work. I hope this is a helpful point of contact, and I'll talk to you on February 7th at 6:30 p.m. Take care. Bye-bye.